Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. The Supreme Court is hearing a case that would challenge the birthright citizenship in this country, an idea that goes back all the way to the 14th Amendment of our Constitution that basically guarantees that anyone born in this country is an American. The administration wants to say that anyone who was born to parents who were not in the U.S. legally or were temporarily not U.S. citizens means that those children are not American citizens. The president is actually so confident in his position that he became the first sitting president in U.S. history to hear oral arguments by the Supreme Court. The case in question here is an appeal to a lower court ruling from New Hampshire that struck down the president's citizenship restriction. So it's clear he really wants the high court to agree with him, so much so he's willing to go there in person to watch them do it. Ending birthright citizenship must be something pretty important to the president, because despite all of his day one promises on the campaign, on the actual day one of his term, he did sign an executive order that limited the right of citizenship to not just anyone born in the United States, despite the fact that the citizenship clause in the Constitution very clearly states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state within they reside. The president feels that that's not really what they meant, and he'll decide who should really get to be American. But the reality is, several lower courts, including that New Hampshire court, struck down his executive order as illegal and likely unconstitutional. But the president does not want to accept that, which is why they are before the Supreme Court in the first place. But when you really get down to it, that's really what this is all about. It is just simply not wanting to accept that the president has already been set. It has already been established, and he just does not want that to be the case, despite the fact that it is enshrined in our Constitution and upheld in an 1898 Supreme Court case. But I guess at the same time, the president, and by extension conservatives in general, didn't see an established precedent and an established law they did not want to upend if it convened them. And the conservative judges on the Supreme Court are not above that either. Let us not forget that Roe v. Wade was established as settled law for over half a century, even being mentioned as such by two Supreme Court justices during their confirmation hearings, yet that was then overturned by those same conservative Supreme Court justices. So it does mean that established precedent isn't necessarily something that cannot be undone. But being a U.S. citizen, if you are born in the United States, is something that has been long established, long upheld, and should not be undone. When you get down to it, the argument against the birthright citizenship is a pretty weak one. They argue that being born in the United States shouldn't automatically make you an American, yet back in 2010, the president himself actively marketed to rich Russians to come over, stay in his properties in Florida, and give the children that are born there dual American Russian citizenship. So apparently it's fine for people that they like, but when it's people they don't like, then birthright citizenship should have its limits. They want to argue that U.S. citizenship should be reserved for only those that are the most loyal to America, and just coming over here and becoming a citizen shouldn't be an option. This is despite the fact that the president's own parent-in-law were made citizens through chain migration, and there's no reason to assume they have any loyalty to the United States. Other than being the parents of a woman who was born to an American citizen, they have no connection to the United States seemingly at all. So is the president trying to argue that his own wife's parents should no longer be made American citizen? Probably not, but the argument still stands that you can't pick and choose who is and isn't an American based by his own personal metric or what their connection to him personally is. While the president's presence before the Supreme Court is certainly historic, there's no recorded case of a sitting president hearing the oral arguments of the Supreme Court. It's hard to not see his presence there as at least an attempt at intimidation directed towards the conservative judges on the court to rule in his favor. Despite how conservatively biased the court has been in recent years, the Supreme Court is supposed to be separate from the other branches of the government, including the executive branch, which is likely part of why the president has never been at the Supreme Court until now. It's not as if there haven't been other historic Supreme Court cases that a president might want to have attended, yet did not, out of deference for that separation of the different branches, and how it might be seen as inappropriate for the executive branch to be mixing with the judicial. But of course, President Donald Trump does not care about any of that and does whatever he wants, regardless of how it looks or what it means. Though what actual effect his presence at the court makes, if any, remains to be seen. It's hard to escape that the argument against birthright citizenship is in itself a weak one, since it really boils down to we feel that an American citizenship is so sacred, so amazing, that to simply give it to someone by virtue of being born in this country demeans what it means to be an American, that there has to be a higher standard than simply being born in this country. And while I would never even try to predict the outcome of the Supreme Court argument, I'm not quite convinced that the court is going to agree with that side. Some of the judges, sure, Alito and Thomas, for sure, are going to side with the president and the administration, that there have to be limits on what it means to be an American, and just being born in America is not enough to guarantee you American status. But, and I acknowledge this is incredibly presumptuous, but I do not think birthright citizenship is going to be overturned. Not even the young, conservative, Trump appointed judges on the court are going to see things his way simply because he sits there and glares at them until they do. There really isn't any good reason to try to reinterpret the 14th Amendment on this issue. And really, some may argue that this should never even have come before the Supreme Court at all, since it's so clear that the Constitution says anyone, not anyone with an asterisk, and then a footnote about which people are exempt from being allowed to be American citizens when they're born in the United States. As a country, we don't gain anything by being more exclusionary as to who can and cannot be a member of our country. I can understand why conservatives don't want those they see as inferior or undesirable to be on the same level as them as American citizens, but the reality is they don't get to decide which people are good enough to be considered Americans. I'll agree, being an American is special and meaningful, but I feel that means that it should be something that should be shared with as many people as possible, not something that should be limited to as few people as possible. Considering just how hard some people work to become Americans, how some risk even their lives simply to be in this country, it's impossible to argue that being an American is valuable, is meaningful in ways that are both tangible and intangible. But to try to argue that being born in this country shouldn't be enough to guarantee that to you, and that the fact that it does demeans what it means to be an American is absurd. But if it somehow came to pass that they did decide to overturn birthright citizenship, and being born in this country was not enough to guarantee you citizenship as an American, it's going down a dangerous path, because once you've eliminated that, then you open the door to saying, well, even those who are already here in this country, maybe they don't all get to be Americans either. Maybe we should have some sort of great American loyalty test that if you fail, you have your citizenship removed. And the title of U.S. citizen should be reserved for only the very selectest of few. And that is the last thing we want to do, because that sounds pretty un-American to me. Honestly, the 14th Amendment is wrong. Seems like a very strange hill to die upon. But attempting to limit who is allowed to call themselves American is something that is very deeply ingrained in the conservative mindset. So I suppose from that perspective, it's not that surprising. The president and his administration have done unbelievable amounts of damage to this country. Damage that will likely take entire lifetimes to undo. So we can only hope that undoing birthright citizenship is not something that they can add on to that pile. But given the fact that reports are the president couldn't even make it an hour and a half before leaving the court, it may be that they will not get that chance. And despite conservative opposition to it, birthright citizenship may not be going anywhere, and I, for one, hope that's the case. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.